Day 683 of the Trump administration. Tonight, it was the presidency of another man that has dictated the decidedly somber tone and tenor of our capital city, as this evening President George Herbert Walker Bush, 41, is resting in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol as members of the public are allowed to file in and pay their respects. The casket arrived in Washington late this afternoon from Houston. Just a few hours ago, President Trump and his wife Melania was among those who came to the Capitol paying respects. We will have more, of course, on the life and the loss of our 41st president later in this broadcast, including the fact that his passing comes at a time of such great crisis for this current White House. And soon after observing at least some period of respectful silence on social media, today the president launched an attack on Twitter, and this was unique in presidential history for its content. It came as he went after his former right-hand man while praising a longtime political ally. Trump actually called for his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to get prison time in response to a court filing from Cohen's lawyers ahead of his sentencing next week, in which they asked for leniency. Trump writes, and we quote, "You mean he can do all of the terrible, unrelated to Trump things having to do with fraud, big loans, taxis, etc., and not serve a long prison term? He makes up stories to get a great and already reduced deal for himself. He lied for this outcome and should, in my opinion, serve a full and complete sentence." One other detail that may have Trump on edge, the filing from Cohen's lawyers also says he consulted with Trump's legal counsel as he prepared for his false testimony about Trump Tower Moscow. Trump's Twitter rant about Cohen was followed by an extraordinary message about Roger Stone, reportedly under scrutiny by Mueller for alleged ties to WikiLeaks. Yesterday, Stone said this about Trump.
"There's no circumstance under which I would testify against the president because I'd have to bear false witness against him. I'd have to make things up, and I'm not going to do that."
Here is Trump's response today, quote, "I will never testify against Trump. This statement was recently made by Roger Stone, essentially stating that he will not be forced by a rogue and out-of-control prosecutor to make up lies and stories about President Trump. Nice to know that some people still have guts." The president added this about the special counsel, Bob Mueller, who is a much different man than people think. And his out-of-control band of angry Democrats don't want the truth. They only want lies. The truth is very bad for their mission. Tonight, there's a Yahoo News report that Robert Mueller's prosecutors have told defense lawyers that they are tying up loose ends in their investigation. Either way, this could be a critical week in the Mueller investigation. I know we say that a lot. That's because tomorrow, Mueller's prosecutors will file sentencing documents for the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Officials are telling NBC News that Friday, the government will also submit a sentencing memo for Michael Cohen. Also on Friday, prosecutors are expected to explain why Paul Manafort's plea agreement collapsed. So we could learn a lot. New reporting on Manafort from the New York Times also reveals that in 2017, and people are still processing this one, he tried to broker a deal with Ecuador to hand WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange over to U.S. authorities. With all of that, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Monday night. John Heilman, our MSNBC National Affairs analyst. He is also co-author of Game Change and co-host of The Circus on Showtime. Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. Attorney himself, also a former senior FBI official. Welcome to you all. Barbara, as you read the material in the president's tweets, what does it read like to you?
Well, I think those who are saying that this gets close to obstruction of justice have a point here. You know, if he were to say these things privately, I think many people would raise an eyebrow about obstruction of justice, and I don't think it makes any difference that they were said outwardly. I don't know that anyone would charge him for any one of these statements alone, but when you look at the pattern of behavior, it all makes a compelling case, I think, for obstruction of justice. A jury would be told to look at the totality of the circumstances and draw fair inferences as to whether the person had a corrupt intent when they were talking about witnesses or the outcome of a case. And I think that these two tweets fall into that pattern, along with many others, like the firing of Jim Comey, the alleged request for a loyalty pledge. And so I think this just adds to the pile of evidence that would suggest there may be obstruction of justice here.
Chuck, I'll give you the fact that it takes some getting used to coming from an American president, as I keep calling it, this Scorsesean language about rats in effect and people turning and people remaining strong under questioning. But having said that, keeping what Barbara just said in mind, does this read to you actionable, or does it just read foolhardy?
You know, Brian, I always keep what Barbara says in mind. It reads to me actionable for precisely the reason that Barbara stated. The hardest thing for prosecutors to do is prove intent. And as Barbara noted, one way you prove intent is by looking at pattern of conduct. So one hyperbolic or Scorsesian tweet at a time, no, it's not sufficient. No one of those tweets is. But when you lay them on top of each other, or you lay them end to end, or whatever sort of metaphor you prefer, that's your pattern, and that's how you show intent. One false tax return is probably not actionable, but filing false tax returns for a decade is, because in the latter scenario, Brian, you've shown a pattern of conduct, and it takes away the excuse that it was an accident or a mistake.
John, your role around here is often to answer the question, what is going on here? We had the body of a former president en route to Washington today, the current president, saying all this on Twitter, trying to affect the jail sentence with a federal judge, and again, kind of supporting someone for not cooperating in a federal case in his own government.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there have been moments in this presidency where the hand of fate and of mortality have given us some kind of contrast that have been the subject of much discussion. The death of John McCain is one example. Now the death of George Herbert Walker Bush is another, where to try to summon an idea of your head that either one of those men, one who was president, one who wanted to be president very much and could have been, would ever have been behaving in a way that was remotely within the same solar system as our current president's behaving is beyond most people's comprehension. Anybody who knew those men, or even anybody in the American public who would watch them on television with any degree of care or acuteness. Look, I think we're seeing this reporting that says we're in the end game. I think the president recognizes that we're in the end game. You look at the calendar now. We're going to see, in short order, we're going to see filings from the Mueller team that relate to the Manafort plea deal being rejected and why it was rejected. We're going to see Michael Cohen's sentencing. We're going to see a detailed filing on the matter of Michael Flynn, all before Christmas. We're going to see all those things. And as the calendar compresses and as we look up and realize we're now a year since President Trump's lawyers were telling him and telling the public that it would be over by a year ago, and it's not over, and things have just gotten worse and worse and worse. I think the president's behavior is symptomatic, not just of the kind of potential legal violations that Chuck has talked about and others have talked about, Barbara has talked about, but also just of a man who may be finally starting to see the writing on the wall.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.